Have you ever been, say, listening to an English song, maybe scrolling through social media, and then bam, suddenly you just get it?
Yeah, like a phrase or a caption.
Exactly. You understand it, but you didn't consciously, translate it back to your first language. It's just this little moment, but it feels kind of significant, right?
Absolutely. And it really makes you wonder, what's actually going on in your brain there? What does it really mean to think in English?
Right. Is it like having this perfect, nonstop inner monologue running in English?
Or is it maybe something else? Maybe something you're already doing more often than you even realize.
Because I think there are definitely some ideas floating around about this that don't quite ring true.
Oh, for sure.
Like the idea that to really think in English, your internal thoughts have to have, like, perfect grammar, even when you're just thinking to yourself.
Yeah, that sounds pretty unrealistic, doesn't it? It is. I mean, think about, does anyone internally narrate their day in perfectly constructed sentences, even in their native language? Probably not.
Good point.
We all have mental stumbles, right?
Yeah.
Imperfect thoughts. And for English learners, it's actually completely normal, even a good sign, if your native language pops into your head sometimes.
Okay, so it's not like some mental block you need to overcome.
Not at all.
And what about that other idea? That thinking in English means you have to somehow, like, completely delete your native language thought patterns. Like hitting reset.
Yeah, that's another big misunderstanding. Fluency isn't about erasing anything, it's about adding capabilities.
Adding.
Yeah, adding to your mental toolkit. Think about bilingual people. They often draw on thought patterns from both languages. It's actually a cognitive plus, giving them more ways to, approach an idea.
Okay, that makes way more sense. Expanding, not replacing.
Yeah.
So what about the translation thing? That feeling that if you ever catch yourself translating in your head, you're somehow, like, failing at thinking in English.
Yeah, a lot of learners worry about that.
But honestly, that worry, it's mostly misplaced. Even really advanced speakers, when they hit a complex idea or maybe a new word, they might do a super quick mental check, a translation, just to process it.
Really? Even advanced ones?
Absolutely. It's just a natural part of how our brains handle language sometimes. It's not a failure. It's just one of the tools in the box, I could say.
Okay, cool. So we've kind of debunked what thinking in English isn't. So let's flip it. What is it then? What does it actually look like when it starts happening?
Okay, so at its core, it really boils down to something we call direct processing.
Direct processing.
Yeah, imagine the word dog, right? If you're thinking in English, when you hear or see dog, you immediately picture the animal, the furry thing, the concept.
Okay.
You're not first thinking of the word for dog in your native language
Right.
and then translating it to the English word dog.
I get it. The English word links straight to the idea. Exactly. It bypasses that whole translation step, which, frees up mental energy for actually understanding things more deeply or speaking more naturally. It's a really key step towards, fluency.
So it's like your brain builds a little shortcut. English word, straight to meaning, no middleman.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just for objects like dogs or cats. It starts happening with non-visual stuff, too.
Like what?
Like humor, idioms, those common social phrases. Things you just get in English without having to, dissect them word by word or translate. Think about hearing, how's it going? You just automatically understand it's a casual greeting, right? You get the social vibe. You're not doing a mental dictionary lookup for how and is and going.
Right, yeah. Your brain just sort of clicks into English mode and the meaning is just there.
Yeah.
No translation needed.
Precisely.
So, okay, if it's not this big lightning bolt moment, when do these little bits of thinking in English usually start showing up for people learning the language?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, it often happens in these really small, almost unnoticed moments scattered through your day. We could call them maybe micro moments of English thought.
Micro moments. Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
All right. Think about when you're quickly scrolling social media. You see a short caption in English, or maybe on Twitter or Instagram.
Yep, happens all the time.
And you just understand it instantly. You don't pause and consciously think, okay, word 1 means this, word 2 means that. Your brain just processes it directly. That's a micro moment.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I do that. Especially with really common phrases or short bits. Sometimes it doesn't even register as English, it just makes sense.
Exactly. Or think about how many non-native English speakers automatically use phrases like, oh my God, or thank you.
Yeah, that's true.
Those become automatic responses, right? They're almost certainly not mentally translating, oh my God, from their native language every single time they say it.
It's like those specific phrases just get hardwired in English. And I've even noticed myself, like, if I'm scribbling down a quick shopping list, sometimes I'll just write a word in, say French, if that word feels more natural or quicker for me right then, even if I was mostly thinking in English.
That is a perfect example. It shows how languages can kind of weave together in your thoughts. Certain words just become more accessible in one language or the other, depending on the situation. It shows your brain is getting flexible and comfortable using both.
Okay, so if these little micro moments are happening, maybe even quite often, why don't we always feel more aware of it? Like, why doesn't it feel like a bigger deal when we're thinking in English?
Well, one way to think about it is that our brains are pretty efficient. Almost.
Oh, yeah.
Sneaky, in a good way.
Sneaky.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of this processing in the background, like an app running silently on your phone. You're not consciously instructing your brain, okay, switch to English now for this Instagram caption. It just happens.
So it's like your brain is learning without you having to sit down and memorize rules all the time. It's just absorbing things.
Exactly. It's picking up patterns, making connections naturally through all the English you see and hear. And because it starts feeling normal and automatic, your attention isn't really on the language switch itself.
Your attention is just on the meaning, on what's being said.
Precisely. And, there are theories about this. A linguist named Stephen Krashen, for instance, suggested that a big chunk of language learning, including getting to the point of thinking in a new language, is largely a subconscious process.
Subconscious.
Yeah, it happens kind of under the radar, mostly through just being exposed to language you can generally understand. Your brain soaks it up without you actively trying.
Ah, okay. So that feeling of it just clicking without tons of conscious effort, that's actually a key part of how we learn to think in another language.
Exactly. And there's also the idea of automaticity, like psychologist Logan talked about. The more you practice, the more you're immersed, the more automatic these language processes become.
Like riding a bike or tying your shoes.
Sort of. It gets so ingrained that it happens without you consciously thinking about how you're doing it. You start focusing on the thought or the message, not the specific language you're using for that thought.
And this automatic thing applies to the small stuff too, right? Like those common phrases or individual words that just kind of pop into your head in English.
Absolutely. The more often you use them or hear them, the more automatic they get. That's why, going back to your example, maybe that French word for bread pops up if you use it a lot in that shopping context.
Right.
And as we said, for people who use more than one language, mixing them up a bit in your thoughts or even when you speak or write is totally normal. It's natural.
So it sounds like our brains are actually doing this thinking in English thing way more often than we probably give them credit for.
Definitely.
It's not some huge mountain we have to climb all at once. It's happening bit by bit in these small, everyday ways.
Exactly right. You could maybe think of it like breathing. Yeah. You do it constantly, right? But you're not always consciously aware, okay, inhale, now exhale. Your lungs are just doing their thing. Similarly, your brain is working away in English in those micro moments, even if you're not actively focused on the fact that it's English.
That's actually a really helpful way to think about it. Okay, so how do we get better at noticing these moments? How do we, catch ourselves in the act, as you said earlier?
Well, it takes a little bit of tuning in, developing a bit more awareness of your own internal chatter throughout the day.
Okay.
Try to notice those times you understand an English sign without consciously translating. Or when you find yourself thinking, or maybe even muttering under your breath an English phrase like, oh dear, or okay, let's go.
But that sounds tricky when you're busy,
Yeah.
Your mind's on other things. It's not like a little alert pops up. Bing, you just thought in English.
No, definitely not. It does take a bit of conscious effort, especially at first, just to tune in. But there are practical things you can try. Like, try writing just a short, simple journal entry in English each night.
Ooh, okay.
Doesn't have to be a masterpiece. Just a few basic sentences about your day, what you did, how you felt. Simple stuff.
That sounds pretty doable. Not too intimidating. Just using words I already know well.
Exactly. The goal isn't perfection, it's just practice. And another thing, if you want to take it a step further, try consciously describing your daily actions to yourself in English.
Internally, like a running commentary.
Yeah, an internal monologue. As you're making coffee, walking to work, whatever, you could even make it fun, like imagine you're narrating your life for a reality show or something.
Okay, now I am carefully selecting the biggest mug.
Yeah.
Because, Monday. I like that. Makes it less like homework.
Right. And the key thing here, really, is to focus on using the words and phrases you already know. Don't stress about trying to use super complex vocabulary right away.
Got it.
The main goal at this stage is just getting comfortable thinking and communicating with yourself in English. Build that habit.
Build the comfort, the automaticity with the basics. The fancy stuff can come later. Okay, so just to quickly recap some key signs. Understanding English phrases without that translation step. And noticing yourself maybe mixing English words into your daily thoughts or lists. Those are pretty good indicators that you're already doing it, right? Thinking in English.
Precisely. Those are great signs. And simple habits like that quick journal entry or narrating your day internally in English can really help encourage more of those moments.
So I guess the big takeaway here is that thinking in English isn't some sudden dramatic switch. It's more like a collection of all these small everyday moments.
Exactly. Moments that are probably already happening for you, even if you haven't been fully tuned into them.
That's actually really encouraging.
It should be. So if you're out there learning English, chances are very, very high that you're already thinking in English much more than you realize. It's not some distant goal. It's a process that's unfolding right now, often in these subtle ways.
And hey, we genuinely love to hear about your own experiences with this.
Yeah.
When was the last time you caught yourself thinking in English? Maybe you automatically whispered, "Thank you," to yourself.
Or maybe you had that moment where an English idiom just suddenly clicked.
Yeah. Or ordered food without mentally rehearsing the translation first. Let us know. Share those moments.
Definitely. And just to quickly touch on a few common English phrases that often become part of this automatic understanding, you might hear light bulb moment.
Ah, yes, the sudden realization.
Exactly. Or something rolls off the tongue.
Meaning it's easy to say, sounds natural.
Yep. And to catch on just means you finally understand something.
Okay.
If something goes under the radar,
It goes unnoticed. Sneaky, like the brain.
right. And one more. If someone says, don't sleep on something.
I mean, don't ignore it. Pay attention because it's important or good.
Exactly. Useful ones to recognize.
Definitely. So thinking about all this, maybe take a moment this week. What are some of those subtle signs you've personally noticed? Those little hints that you might be starting to think more directly in English.
And maybe how could you intentionally create just a few more of those thinking in English opportunities in your daily routine, even small steps?
Yeah, some really interesting things to mull over as you go about your week.